Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second Orca Talk. My name is Donna Sandstrom, and I'm the director of the Whale Trail. How many of you were here last month? Oh, excellent. So you know what a good time we had, and we're getting off to another great start tonight. The Whale Trail, in case you don't know, is a series of sites all around the region where you can see orcas and other marine mammals from shore. And our goal is to remind or let people know that the whales use this whole region. These whales are endangered, and simply by building that little piece of awareness that they actually live here, we're hoping to make sure the whales survive to the next generation. So, I've got to take a few deep whale breaths. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. And I've got a few other thank yous. As always, thank you to Pete from C&P for having us in what feels like a second home. And thank you to all the volunteers tonight who came and make this always run so smoothly. Thank you to seal sitters, especially Dave and Eileen and Robin and everyone who comes with them, and Laura James from Toxic.org, and Puget Sound Keepers Alliance. And we have someone new with us tonight. Mike Russell's in the back there. Mike's a photographer. If you've ever seen the whales here, if you've been out at Alki watching whales, you might see a few people taking pictures. One of them is likely Mike, and he's brought some great orca and other nature scene cards and photos to sell here tonight. And back again is Judy Lane, who does the same thing, takes wonderful photos of wildlife, especially around West Seattle, but all around the region. And I really encourage you to stop and look at their photos and cards and support this very local, homegrown art. And also that helps support the Whale Trail. They're donating a portion back to the Whale Trail, which is really generous and wonderful. So, buy art and do good all the way around. And I have another very exciting announcement. Well, I have a few. So the way the program is going to go, I'll talk for a few minutes, and then we'll have seal sitters. We'll hear from seal sitters give an update about the pinnipeds. That's another word for seals. And then we'll hear from Laura, and she'll talk to us about everything at Toxic.org, and also about the Puget Sound Keepers Alliance. And then Lynn Berry from NOAA Fisheries, our featured speaker, will start at about 7:20. That talk will go to 8:15. We've got this place until 9, and so what we're hoping you do when the talk is over is mingle a little bit and have a big super pod. and help yourself to a wonderful glass of wine or a beer or whatever you like this time of night, and then definitely check in at our Whale Trail table. If you haven't already, sign up with us so we can let you know about events here and all around the Whale Trail. So I wanted to update you a little bit about some very exciting things going on with the Whale Trail. On April 11th, we're going to be celebrating the installation of a Whale Trail sign at Kalaloch Lodge on the Olympic Peninsula. So we're connecting all along the coast. And we're really excited about this one because it's a triple partnership between the Whale Trail, which itself is a partnership of 6 different organizations, the Whale Trail, the Olympic National Park, and the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary all work together to do the Whale Trail along the coast, and especially in Olympic National Park. We couldn't be happier about this, and there's a lot of people who are going to learn about whales when they're in that beautiful spot at Kalaloch, April 11th. And that's on April 10th, the Quileute Nation, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Quileute Nation does a wonderful welcome the whale ceremony in La Push. Has anyone ever been to it? If you've been to it, then you can back me up and say that it's such a unique and wonderful and quintessentially Northwest Washington thing to do. If there's any way you can get out there for 2 days, you would have a wonderful time. The 10th at La Push and the 11th at Kalaloch. Join us out there because it's going to be a really, really wonderful time. So that's coming up in April. And then this year, we have a grant from the ALEA, from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, to do 4 new signs. And one of those is going to be at Limekiln State Park on San Juan Island, which is kind of our whale watching from shore spot number 1. So I was just up there yesterday, and it's very exciting to think about that. And then we're going to have another new sign up at Point Roberts, which is just on the other side of the Canadian border. And from this grant, likely one in Olympia, and likely one on Kitsap County. So our goal is to have every coastal county represented on the whale trail and every coastal tribe, and up around BC, and eventually down in Mexico. So that's what we're up to. And the whale trail is 5 years old this year, so we're having a big birthday year. And as part of that, I'm very excited to tell you, we have our first sustaining corporate sponsor. We, through Laura, this is a wonderful story because it's the power of the pod. Laura was giving a presentation at Alaska Airlines, and a guy who works for Alaska Airlines has also started his own tortilla chip company, and he makes tortilla chips that are non-GMO, gluten-free, and he's a surfer who was inspired to create food products that don't pollute the ocean through pesticides. And he reached out to Laura and sent her a box of chips for her talk. Well, they're called Whale Tails tortilla chips. So she knew I had to see them right away. So she sent me we exchanged emails, and within 3 emails, the Whale Tail Tortilla Chips Company offered to give us 6% of all their sales in Oregon and Washington. Wow. So this is, as many of you know, fundraising is a significant part of a nonprofit, and the more, my vision has always been to support the whale trail through things like this, where people, like through Newman's Own, people are buying products that are good products that they're going to buy anyway. So I couldn't be happier, and especially how it came about. So thank you, Laura, again, for making this possible.
Thank you for making the whale trail so it could be possible.
So it's a great thing. And so we have sample chips at the back for everybody. If you haven't already, please have a bag of chips. And Husky Deli is the first store in Washington to carry these. So,
Go Jack!
Yeah, yes, exactly. Jack, and I want to tell you, Jack did this without even tasting them or seeing them. He said, of course, he ordered 9 cases just because. He was very happy that they're tasty too. So there's 3 varieties. Anyway, there's and you can see there's humpbacks on 2 of them, and a beautiful orca pod on this one. And these are all art by Wyland, the Hawaiian artist. So the art is just gorgeous. And it says Whale Tails Tortilla. So anyway, I would like you all to go to Husky Deli and buy some chips and tell Jack that the Whale Trail sent you. And if you know anyone who owns a grocery store, send them our way. Okay, so our first, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. But our first speaker tonight is going to be Robin Lindsay from Seal Sitters. One of the things we're very excited about doing with the series is emphasizing that we're all concerned about the same things. We have a slightly different focus on the seals or the whales, but it's really all the same issues we're talking about, and making sure they all thrive in our backyard. So Robin, oh, here you are, Robin. Without further ado, Robin from Seal Sitters.
Okay, Seal Sitters is a marine mammal stranding network for this area. I don't know how many people are familiar with our group, but we respond to marine mammals dead or alive from Brace Point, which is south of the Fauntleroy Ferry, all the way through the Duwamish River. So we respond to gray whales. We responded to sea lions, California sea lions, Steller sea lions, elephant seals, harbor porpoise. The majority of responses that every marine mammal stranding network makes, though, is to, is to seal pups. Okay? And these seal pups are just trying to find a place to come ashore and rest and warm up. This was our seal pup Spanky from last year, and Spanky used the rocks along Alki Avenue for literally practically every day for 2 months. Sorry, I keep thinking it's over here. So this is Pebbles, another one of our pups. So these pups, they're varied in color, varied in coats. This is our first seal pup from this year, which was Georgie. And Georgie was a newborn pup. So these pups are really trying to find a safe place to come on shore and rest, and it's critical to their survival. But where did they end up? On Alki Beach in the middle of the summer, or at Lincoln Park with people and off-leash dogs. And this is seal pup Spud, who came ashore in the middle of August at Alki Beach. He was our first seal pup. He was immediately surrounded by about 100 people. who didn't know what to do, and basically, if you see a seal pup on shore, what we want you to do is stay back, keep people and dogs away, and call the Stranding Network. So we are the Stranding Network. So basically, we come out, we establish a perimeter, we talk to the public, we educate them about seal biology, we do health assessments, and we provide animals for necropsy for the scientists. So basically, this is what our group does. We're setting perimeters and talking to folks. Kids, our volunteers are out, rain or shine, winter, spring, summer. You know, this was February, it was like freezing outside, so we have an incredible group of volunteers. And seal pups can pick some unusual spots to come ashore, or haul out as we call it. This seal pup came up the steps at Alki Beach, and in fact we had another one just this past week that did the same thing, and I call this the world's smartest seal pup, because he hauled out under the sign that says, "Don't touch me, and by the way, here's the number to call." So this is Forte. And the day we were watching over Forte, these two girls, the Etienne on the right, she was in the 2nd grade, and her sister is in kindergarten. They talked to us at length. And then Etienne went home, and she read her mother told me she read every single page on our website, and about pollution and how balloons, you know, seals and other animals eat balloons and they can die. So she organized her 2nd grade class to do a beach cleanup. Wow. This is the power of what we do. So she has been a seal sitter now for, let's see, she's 11. So she's been around a while. So we are having a new volunteer training Saturday the 9th, and we really hope that some of you, we have a lot of our volunteers here, but we're always looking for new dedicated volunteers, but I will warn you, it's addictive. So harbor seals are considered by biologists to be an indicator species for the health of the sound because they don't migrate. So if our waters are polluted, our harbor seals are polluted, just as our orcas are polluted. And any kind of contaminants or anything are absorbed in their blubber. The year before last, we had an incredible bumper crop of seal pups. And we had 51 positively identified seal pups. Our hotline handled about 800 calls. It was a crazy year. This past season, it was very disturbing. We had fewer pups. They were emaciated. And of the dead pups that we had, they were about 4 inches shorter than the norm for, you know, this is going on our 7th year. So we were going, what in the world is going on? It was really a very disturbing situation. And this just shows you the difference. The top pup, that's a healthy, successful, weaned harbor seal pup. The pup below is a struggling, very much struggling, emaciated pup. So you can see the drastic difference here. Unfortunately, that pup in the front died a day later, and one of our volunteers went out and retrieved the pup for necropsy. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Are the pups being born prematurely? Are they being weaned too soon? Is there not enough food out there? Maybe there's not enough food, so moms are weaning their pups earlier because the mom needs to eat. Are there contaminants? Is there a virus? Well, the problem is we can't answer these questions without funding for research, and the funds are just incredibly, sorry, they're not there, let's just say that. So what is the human impact? Okay, we've got marine debris and pollution. This is the harbor seal pup I responded to. It was entangled in a illegal tribal net. Thankfully, I was able to free that pup. I don't recommend it. It was incredibly dangerous. Sandy was a pup that we rescued in August of 2011. She was rehabbed, released in the next January, and Sandy she had a satellite tag, she was tracked, and 180 days later, Sandy was found dead, entangled in fishing line in Edmonds. So we've got a face for pollution, and it's Sandy. It's our little rehab pup. We had beach cleanups in her honor. We had the Arroyos gray whale. It was an international story. There was no food in the animal's stomach, only human trash. Golf ball, plastic bags, rope, half a pair of sweatpants. I mean, it was just unbelievably horrible. So we have a huge human impact. And this year we got a grant from the city. It's an educational outreach project called Year of the Seal. We're going to schools. We're having an essay contest, an art contest. We're having a bronze sculpture of a mom and pup installed down at Alki Beach. And because harbor seals are an indicator species, we're considering the harbor seal as the face for all the marine mammals and marine life of Puget Sound. So we'll have updates about that, but it should be quite a fun project. I think I went over.
Okay, that's good. Do you have any questions for Robin while she's here? Okay, there'll be time later too. Thank you, Robin. And our next speaker is Laura James. Laura wears so many hats, it's hard to know where to start. You might know her as Diver Laura, whose wonderful videos appear on the West Seattle blog. Thank you, West Seattle blog, Patrick, for being here tonight, by the way. And Laura had a video of an octopus hatching nest, octopus eggs hatching that went viral, legitimately viral. It's wonderful, a wonderful, simple. Through Laura's videos, she tells the story that sounds so eloquently in a way that, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and Laura's videos are certainly worth more than that. And she also is the spokesperson for Toxic.org, which is focused on teaching people about our impact on stormwater that goes into the sound and impacts all the creatures we're talking about tonight. And then finally, she's, and most recently, has become the communications director for the Puget Soundkeepers Alliance. So thank you, Laura, for...
Communications coordinator. She keeps giving me a promotion.
Don't tell whoever is the director I'm doing that. So thank you, Laura, again for being here.
So how many of you were here last week? Okay. So you're going to have to suffer through the video again, because there's people who are new here. For those who don't know me, my name is Laura, as she said, and I'm a diver out here. I've been diving out here for about 22 years now, coming on 23 years. And when I started diving out here, I saw so many amazing things. I saw beautiful things. And then I realized that there were not such beautiful things out there as well. There was a lot of garbage. There were storm drains. There were things like that you just don't want to see. And I thought, well, if I teach lots of people to dive, they'll all come out and they'll see the exact same thing and they'll fall in love with it and want to protect it too. And then I found out that that wasn't the case. People, just like walking by garbage on the side of the street, people walk right by, they swim right by. I swam right by. Until a couple years ago, I swam right by one of these, a storm drain. It was a storm outfall. And what I saw changed my life that day was pretty much, I mean, you can look at my life and see I was on one path, and then it completely, basically, I gave my life to trying to explain this to people and trying to get this message out. This is right off of Alki Beach, literally right off the volleyball courts. How many of you guys are from here? Local? All right. This is during a heavy rainstorm. This was pretty much the first flush this last year. Once the rain started, we had like, whatever, 90 days of dry weather, and this was what comes out. But it looks like this most of the time. Maybe not quite as black, but whenever there's rain, it picks up all sorts of things. It picks up dog poop. It picks up, yes, there's some dirt in there. It picks up tire rubber. It picks up brake pads. You guys wonder where your tires go when you have to get them changed and they're kind of bald? That's where they go. Your brakes, that's where they go. We have a very porous trash system. So when you lose a pen out of your pocket, the bottle cap kind of went away. Oh, gosh, I don't have it covered. All that stuff comes out these storm drains. Anything that can get down a grade comes out into Puget Sound. There is no trap. And it does not all go to the municipal treatment center. Much of it goes right out to Puget Sound. And you guys have probably heard a little bit about bottle caps. You know, you can get those recycled. You can take them into Whole Foods. You can take them to Aveda. They'll take them. Bottle caps are horrible. Bottle caps get inside our birds, our marine life. They eat them. They think they're food. Those are floaty plastic. Those are the plastics you guys all see when you walk along the beach. Ah, earplugs and bottle caps are what I see most. But what you don't see, you've now seen the middle level. You've seen the stuff that goes the plume, essentially, as they call it. But what you don't see is the underwater trash. And we talk a lot about the Great Pacific Gyre and things like that, and all this trash that people can go look at, and it's horrifying. But we also have an underwater garbage patch. And right out from that storm drain is this patch that's expanding and expanding, and it's continuing to expand. And we pulled up people, and people just kind of look at Puget Sound, and they throw they used to throw batteries in there. We removed a ton of lead from the old Seacrest Marina area. And on a dive, in about 5 minutes, we removed 100 golf balls. That area, where right out from the storm drain you just saw, is actually a gray whale feeding area. It's in that nice shallow zone that they come in and they scoop up food. And so you wonder where the gray whale is going to get all this nasty stuff in its stomach. Right there off our beach from us. So my message is from Toxic and from Soundkeeper. Get involved. Don't walk right by. Pick up garbage, pick up dog poop, pick up trash. Try to make changes in your day-to-day life that will actually positively influence the future of our Puget Sound. If you want to learn more about it, I've got a lot of brochures back there, and I go around town and will talk to anybody, no group too small. I'll come give the Toxic Monster presentation, which is that guy. Don't feed the toxic monster. And I'll answer any questions after the show. And we'll go to schools too.
Thank you, Laura.
Sorry, Ralph, I'm also your AV person tonight. So.
Another hat. Our featured speaker tonight is Lynn Berry from NOAA Fisheries. And Lynn is the branch chief in the Protected Resources Division at NOAA. She's been with the division for over 10 years and I consider Lynn point central for all the killer whale issues. Lynn was instrumental in getting the killer whales listed. She actually wrote the killer whale recovery plan, and she's responsible for implementing a lot of its actions. So Lynn's got a lot to do. Not to pressure you too much, but the fate of the whales, Lynn, Lynn's got a lot to do, and I'm happy to tell you that the whales are in very good hands with Lynn at steering this ship for them. We, on a personal note, we first met, and a professional note, what brought Lynn to Seattle from Washington, D.C. was Springer, a little orphaned whale. Lynn came out to work on the Springer project, and we first met in a conference room at Adobe when Lynn came to us with an Excel spreadsheet and said, here's what we need to rescue the whale. And a group of about 6 of us turned around to the community and said, we need duct tape, we need a foam pad, we need a scale. We went out to the community, responded incredibly. And as you all know, because we tell that story every time, it was an incredible success story. Springer's thriving and with her family today. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of her going home this last summer. And one of the great legacies of the Springer Project is the relationships that were formed during it. And certainly Lynn and I, that's what brought us together. And Lynn's also very instrumental in the whale trail, because shortly after I left my software career, we were in her office talking one day, and I was like, I've always had this idea that we could have some signs all around the region to tell people about the orcas. And she lit up and said, that is a great idea, and we'll be part of your team. If you'll lead it, we'll be with you. That was a pretty powerful yes. And 5 years later, here we are with the whale trail in place, reaching over 22 million people on the ferries, if I forgot to mention that. And anyway, and Lynn has continued to do great work for the whales and other species. She's also now responsible for rockfish, endangered rockfish, and has a lot to do with salmon recovery as well. So we're really happy to have you out here in West Seattle tonight, and thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you for that great introduction, Donna. You told a good Springer story, and I'm always happy to talk about Springer. But one of the things that Donna mentioned for Springer is that she really has brought a lot of a face to killer whale recovery and a lot of partners together. And partnerships are really the only way that I can do the big job that's ahead of all of us. So it sounds like many of you were here and probably had a little bit of a brief overview of killer whales last month, but I'll give you a quick refresher or maybe some new information for people who weren't here. Just a little overview. I'll talk about the southern resident killer whales that are listed as endangered under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, and some parts of our ESA recovery program that include critical habitat designation, also our recovery plan, the development of that plan, and what we're implementing from the plan with all of our partners. And a little bit about sort of where we are a few years later. We did a 5-year status review that completed in 2011, sort of an update. Okay, so killer whale basics, they're big, they're black and white. We love them. There are different kinds. This is a great poster that shows 10 different types of whales. They're in every ocean on the planet, and we're learning more and more about them all the time. My colleagues in our California Science Center in the Southwest put this poster together. They do a lot of work in Antarctica on the different Antarctic killer whales in the southern hemisphere. And then over here are the North Pacific whales that we know. We have different ecotypes here in our own backyard. The transients, those are the marine mammal-eating killer whales. And they're generally in small groups. They're kind of quiet. We have offshores that are not in Puget Sound, but off the coast. That's why we call them offshores. But we don't know as much about them. We're still learning what they eat. Likely fish, maybe even sharks. They have some wearing on their teeth that we've seen from stranded animals that's really interesting. And they're in very large groups offshore. And today we're going to focus on the residents. So here we have the southern residents, but they have neighbors to the north in Canada, the northern residents. There are also resident whales in Alaska. And so there's a few different groups in the North Pacific. So our southern residents, some of the key features that really endear them to us and are so fascinating, they live in these very stable family groups. Sons and daughters will stay with their moms for their entire life. So we have these groups, we have multiple generations living together in a matriline, sort of the mom is the lead, and her children and her daughter's offspring as well are all together. And these are the fish-eating whales. They eat salmon, and primarily Chinook salmon. So you might ask, well, how do we know which salmon they're eating? We have a science team that goes out and does a number of research projects. And this is a picture of our team with their highly technical equipment. It's a pool net. And they can scoop up scales when the whales are feeding. And we can identify not just the species, like Chinook salmon, but we can actually identify which river they came from through genetic studies. So we know they eat a lot of Fraser River Chinook salmon. They can also scoop up poop from the whales, and we can do some other analysis on that as well to find out what they're eating and some other things about the whales. These are really unique animals. They use echolocation. They use sound. They send out signals into the environment that bounce off things like each other and fish, and that helps them find their food. They use sound to communicate with each other. They're diving deep. It's very dark down there, so sound is really very important for these whales. And they have distinct dialects, these southern residents, and each pod has distinct sounds, distinct signs that they make just for each other. And they also have some pretty unique behaviors. You heard about the super pod, J, K, and L pod, all get together in the same time, same place. They do this greeting ceremony where they sort of line up and face each other. And that's a pretty unique thing that hasn't been seen in other killer whale populations. So those are just a few highlights on the southern residents. Where do they go? Where do they live? They're in our backyard in Puget Sound. Donna mentioned Lime Kiln is a great land-based viewing spot. And this is sort of a hot spot for the whales, particularly in the summer, right along that west side of San Juan Island. But if you look down here, we've got hundreds of sightings over the history. Right here off West Seattle. They do come down into all parts of Puget Sound. So while their range, they also spend time out in the ocean, extends from California, sort of around Monterey, we've seen K&L pods. They extend all the way up into southeast Alaska. And we used to think they just went to British Columbia, but some photos were found fairly recently, and they were able to identify the whales as southern residents up in southeast Alaska. So we're still learning. Oh, and I should mention that right now we are learning where the whales are spending time off the coast. So this map is a satellite track. There's a satellite tag on K25 right now. And this is one of our research projects to fill this key data gap about where they're going off the coast, how far offshore, where are they spending their time. So the tag was attached in Puget Sound, and the whales have traveled out into the ocean. Cape Cod has gone down to California. They've come back up toward Washington. They've gone back to California. And this is really a tremendous amount of new data that we've never had before. We're sometimes able to track the whales' movements as people see them and take photos. We can also listen for them on buoys that are along the coast. But this is sort of a new tool for us to really see where they're going and what they're doing. I mentioned JK and L pods. We have fewer than 90 whales right now. And how do we know how many whales there are? We can tell each one apart. And the Center for Whale Research, Ken Balcom and his group up on San Juan Island, they have been studying these whales since the 70s. Because we can identify individuals, we know each year exactly how many whales there are in the population. We know when a whale is missing and it's presumed dead. We also know when a new whale is born. And because those calves stay right next to mom, we know who mom is. And we're also starting to learn through genetics who the dads are. But we've been able to track the population, and the Center for Whale Research does an annual census. And it was in the late 90s, from about 96 to 2001, when we saw a big decline in the population. It was almost 20% decline, from about 100 animals to about 80. And the big question was, what's going on? Why are we seeing this decline? And that's what really started the impetus of some strong concern for the whales, that they might need protection, that perhaps they should be listed under the Endangered Species Act. So we went through a process. It's a legal government process under the Endangered Species Act where someone petitions us, says we think this group needs to be listed. This actually went through some court proceedings, a little bit of back and forth. We had a lot of interesting discussion about the southern residents in particular. Is this a group on its own that could be listed? We can list a species, a subspecies, and what's called a distinct population segment. Is this group of whales, is it unique? Are they significant? And our determination was yes, they are discrete, they're significant, so they're a distinct population segment, and they are in danger of extinction. And so in 2006, almost exactly the anniversary, about 7 years ago, we listed them as endangered under the ESA. So what are the factors, the threats to the whales that we identified, and why are they endangered? One is prey. Do these whales have enough to eat? So we know they eat Chinook salmon. Also sometimes more in the fall and winter when they're moving down into South Puget Sound. There aren't as many Chinook around. They eat chum salmon. Well, some of our Chinook and chum salmon populations are also listed under the Endangered Species Act because they've been reduced through harvest, through habitat, hydropower issues, all kinds of habitat and harvest issues and hatcheries. I think that's the 4 H's. So they've got a lot going on, the salmon, and this is the primary prey of the whales. And it sounds like a simple story. We've got an endangered species eating another endangered species that we also like to eat. But it's even more complicated than that. It's a very complex food web. There are other predators, other marine mammals and birds and fish that also eat salmon at different life stages. And so it's been a really complex challenge for us to understand exactly which types of salmon the whales are eating, when and where might they be food limited. But we know that there have been large reductions in some of the salmon populations, and that finding enough food is a threat for the whales. You just heard about some pollution and contaminant issues. This is a big issue for the whales. One reason, because they can live a long time. We've got Granny out there who we think is in their 90s. And so they're at the top of the food chain, they live a long time, they can accumulate these contaminants in their system over that long lifespan. Things that we don't really use much anymore, PCBs and DDT, but also some newer contaminants that we're concerned about, these PBDEs, those are flame retardants that are in a lot of our products. And Washington State is actually pretty good about banning some of the types of PBDEs, and they're phasing that in over time, but still a concern for the whales. And these high levels of contaminants that we see in the whales can cause both reproductive and immune function problems for the whales. And I put a picture of the calf here, and that reminds me that these contaminants, they live in the fat, they're lipophilic. They also are in the milk that the mom is feeding to her offspring. So while for the moms, that's an opportunity to lower her toxic contaminant load, it's really bad for the calf because they're getting a dose right from mom, even before they start eating the fish, perhaps contaminated fish in Puget Sound. And if you're a male, you don't have any opportunity. You're just accumulating contaminants through your whole life. So we got prey, we got pollution and contaminants. And the other big threat that we've identified are vessels and sound. Mentioned that these whales use echolocation to find their food, and they use sound to communicate and navigate. And there's a healthy whale watch operations that go on both in the US and Canada. Because the whales are pretty predictable in the summer, especially in the San Juan Islands area, it supports a pretty active whale watch industry. And it also supports recreational whale watching. And so this is a concern. We've got a lot of research that's come out over the years about how boats and how sound might affect the whales. How does the sound reduce the ability of the whales to echolocate and find a fish in the water column? How might the boats being around change the behavior? We see that whales spend less time feeding and foraging when the boats are nearby and more time traveling. So it's affecting their behavior and their ability to find their food. And also the whales are at risk for ship strikes. There's been a northern resident up in Canada, and it's always something we're concerned about, that close interaction between boats and whales. And other sources of sound as well in the environment that can affect the whales. There's a few other factors that we don't think were necessarily a cause of that population decline we saw, but we know are big risks for these whales. And because they get in a super pod and they're really social and they can all be in the same place at the same time, that puts them at risk for something catastrophic like a big oil spill or even a disease that can be transmitted through the whole population. So, and they're a small sized population, so all these things put them at a higher risk. And it's most likely, a combination of multiple factors. It's not just one thing. It's perhaps there aren't as many fish as the whales would like. And the boat sound makes it a little harder to find the fish that are out there. So then they start using their blubber stores, and that's where the contaminants are located and start getting into their bloodstream. So it's likely a combination of all these things that worries us about the whales. So what are we doing about it? So this will get into a little bit more of the conservation program. One of the first things under the Endangered Species Act for listed species is we're required to designate critical habitat, to identify what are those features in the habitat that are essential for the whales. Things like water quality, do they have enough prey, and can they get from one place to another where they need to go. So as you can see, these three colors, green and blue and an orange, we designated 3 different areas. This is most of Puget Sound, and this is where we had enough information to identify the features. We've got a lot of good information about where the whales are going, how they're spending their time, and more we'll be learning those types of things along the coast, and that could inform additional critical habitat designation down the line. So another part of a recovery program for an endangered species is a recovery plan. Now, even before the whales were listed, and even before we had a recovery plan, we were very fortunate to get some funding. Senator Cantwell is a big supporter of killer whales, and she provided some line item funding that helped us with research. It helped, we put some enforcement support on the water, working with the state of Washington, and we started a lot of education programs. So we were able to do this starting back in 2003. So our recovery program started even before the whales were listed as endangered. And we've just sort of rolled right along in developing a recovery plan. And the recovery plan really focuses on this broad approach to address all the threats we know about. And it also incorporates an adaptive process. As much as we know about these whales, as much as we've learned over the 30 years that they've been studied, there's still a lot we don't know. So the recovery plan is organized in a way that as we learn new information, we can incorporate that and do some updates and help prioritize some of our recovery actions. So we've got actions underway and ongoing for all of the threats. On the prey issue, we're coordinating with a lot of the salmon recovery that's going on. There's a salmon recovery plan for Puget Sound for those species. We've also undertaken a scientific review of how salmon fisheries in particular might be affecting the prey base of the killer whales. And this includes salmon fisheries in Puget Sound, along the coast, in Canada, even up in Alaska. And this has been a joint process that we've engaged with our counterparts in Canada, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So while we've got a good scientific review that we've gotten back from the science panel, we're still working on what does that mean for management and how might we need to adjust fisheries to help ensure that the whales have enough to eat. On the contaminants front, we've been doing some work with the Puget Sound Partnership. So this is a group that brings a lot of federal and state and local agencies together and with an action agenda to restore Puget Sound. And killer whales are on the cover. I think they're on the cover of the new one as well, the updated Puget Sound Partnership Action Agenda. And so this is just a good reminder for us that these whales are spending a lot of time in Puget Sound, which is a very urban area, a lot of development, a lot of things going on. And so this is a good comprehensive plan. And one of the actions in the action plan is to implement the recovery plan for southern resident killer whales. So they're very closely linked. Another issue we talked about is vessel impacts. So what types of actions do we have in the recovery plan? We've got guidelines and regulations about responsible wildlife viewing. So that includes all kinds of boat-based viewing, commercial operations, recreational boaters, kayakers, sailboats, anybody who's out there who wants to see the whales from the water. We've got guidelines about how close to get, how long you should stay, and I've got copies if anybody needs a little update on how to view whale lives. So having those guidelines in place is part of our recovery program. Also updating them as we learn more, and we do that through a lot of monitoring activities. We've got some research projects that are specifically looking at how the boats might be affecting the whales. And we also have on the water monitoring groups. We have a group that we work with called Sound Watch, and they're with the Whale Museum in Friday Harbor. And they're out on the water every day. They're educating boaters. They're handing out these materials. And that's just, it's so great because it's right there on the scene. There's whales off in the distance, and it's just an opportunity to talk to recreational boaters and say, hey, there's whales up ahead. You know, you should stay 200 yards away. Stay on the offshore side if you can. And people are very eager to learn about what's the right thing to do and how to responsibly view the whales. Another element of vessel impacts and dealing with those types of activities is to encourage and promote land-based viewing. So of course the whale trail sounds like a great idea to me. It's right there in our recovery plan as one of the actions we can take. So another action was to evaluate whether our guidelines were enough. And we embarked on this process about whether we needed some regulations to help protect the whales. And we started back in 2007, and we just put out an advance notice to say we're thinking about doing this, you know, get some public input and some public feedback. And using all that information, we incorporated a lot of public input from industry groups and whale watchers, and we did an economic analysis. And we put this all together and we proposed a regulation in 2009, working with Department of Fisheries and Oceans, with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Coast Guard, and got a lot of public comment on that proposal as well. And then we were able to go final in 2011 with a couple regulatory actions. So in the past, we had a 100-yard guideline, and now we have a 200-yard regulation. So by regulation, the boats have to stay 200 yards. We found that to be a good compromise where it would still allow for some educational and economically viable boat-based whale watching, but also provide more protection to the whales than the previous guideline had. And then also we want to keep the boats out of the pathway of the whales. That's where they're swimming, using their echolocation, where they're interacting with each other. So just keeping boats out of their path was the other part of the regulation. So this is just a little graphic, some of the new materials. How do you implement a new regulation? The three elements of our plan has been education and outreach. So making sure that people know about the new regulations and as well as the View Whale Life guidelines. We updated the Be Whale Wise guidelines to be in step with the new regulations. And also, we've been working on enforcement. NOAA has an enforcement detail, but we've got very limited boats and officers that can be out on the water. So we work closely with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and their on-water enforcement division. And then also monitoring. So we want to make sure that these regulations we put in place are effective, that we're definitely decreasing the risk to the whales. So we're continuing to collect data with SoundWatch and also a counterpart in Canada called StraightWatch to look at how are the boats behaving around the whales, how many boats are around, how close are they complying with the guidelines and the regulations. And also we're collecting data on any economic impacts to recreation, to tourism, to the whale watch industry. All right, I'm going to get governmenty for a minute. I'm sorry. This is part of my job. This is part of the Endangered Species Act, and it's actually a really strong part of the Endangered Species Act. It's called Section 7, and what it means is that NOAA Fisheries has to ensure that any federal action won't jeopardize the continued existence of an endangered species or modify or destroy critical habitat. So that's the governmenty part, but really what it means is that anything that has federal funding or a federal permit or that a federal action is undertaking, those projects come to us and it gives us an opportunity to work with those federal agencies and reduce their impacts, to mitigate as much as we can or eliminate any impacts, and to evaluate what it means for the whales. So this is all types of activities. Fisheries, I mentioned, we've got some hatchery and hydropower actions that affect salmon and therefore also affect the whales. There are things that don't even happen in the water, things that happen upland, like a national flood insurance program affects salmon habitat, which can also affect the whales. So these are the types of projects. We look at a wide range of things that are going on in the Sound. Some of the outfalls that we saw that are pretty bad, they're not really, we don't have that federal link. Those are regulated on a state level. But if it's a federal facility, like Joint Base Lewis McChord, then we have an opportunity to look at some of the impacts for things like stormwater and outfall. There's some new stuff coming in, some tidal energy projects, some liquefied natural gas terminals that might go in, and then also Navy and Coast Guard operations. This Navy sonar that people are concerned about, that's something that our agency works closely with the Navy to look at what their impacts, to see what we can do to mitigate and eliminate where we can. And so this is really kind of a very process-oriented, but it's actually very powerful, and it's a good opportunity for us to make a lot of progress. So one more thing that we're working on as part of our recovery program is an oil spill response plan. Especially having some experience, I went down to the Gulf and worked on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill for a few months. It was really clear to me that we need to be better prepared. We need to know what we're going to do in the event of an oil spill. How could we keep whales away from an oiled area? Are there some safe methods that we could do to just keep them out of the oil? Also, 20 years after Exxon Valdez, there was a lot of study of the whales, and we didn't have whales that were killed during the oil spill that we could examine and really detail what the impacts were. It was only 20 years later, after looking at different populations and how they were exposed or not exposed, and how they changed and were affected by oil spills. So it's a big concern for us. And we've had a workshop to talk about these tools we might use to keep whales away from an oiled area. And we've got a draft response plan in place. We're working closely with the state and the Coast Guard. And we're even talking about doing some oil spill drills to really incorporate marine mammals and southern resident killer whales in particular into that drill activity. So we know how to coordinate with each other, we know where the resources are, and we're prepared. So I sleep better at night knowing we have some preparation in place. So I mentioned that the whales go up to Southeast Alaska. That means they gotta swim through Canadian waters. In addition to being listed under the Endangered Species Act in the US, both southern and northern residents are listed under the Species at Risk Act in Canada. Yay, go Canada! So transboundary species, we're working very closely. I mentioned coordination with DFO and a number of things like our salmon fisheries analysis. They also participated when we were working on our vessel regulations. And Canada is also working on some nationwide regulations for all marine mammals. So we might see those sometime in 2013. We also work with the state. In addition to having a federal vessel regulation, there's also a state regulation. So we have that extra support from the state. And then we coordinate with Canada, we coordinate with the state, we coordinate with the research community. I mentioned some groups already, like the Center for Whale Research that does the annual census. The NWFSC, that is the NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center. Those are my colleagues on the sort of science side. I'm more on the policy and management side. And those are the guys that are out in the boat with the pool net scooping up fish scales. They're the ones that are tracking the whale with the satellite tag, doing a wide range of research projects to help fill in some data gaps about where the whales are, what they're eating at different times of year, how boats might be impacting them, what contaminants might do to reproduction and immune system. So a lot of coordination going on. And just to talk a little bit more about the research, we've gathered scientists together that work on killer whales all over the world, tried to identify what are some of these high priority data gaps, where do we really need to focus the funding that we've had, how do we foster these partnerships. So the population monitoring is a key piece of that to let us know if we're on the right track, if the whales are headed toward recovery or not, they're on the right road. That winter distributions have really been a key for us to learn more about where the whales are and how they're using their habitat, so we might be able to do some additional habitat protection. We might be able to do some work if we do think the fisheries, particularly in the winter months, when the whales are off the coast, if they're being affected, if the whales are being affected by those activities. Contaminants is a really challenging one. With a population of less than 90 whales, there's not as much experimentation or sampling that we can do. And so we really rely on some other species research. We have a lot of information about harbor seals. They are a great indicator of the local health of the sound, including contaminant levels. So we know some of the threshold levels for different contaminants and how that affects species like harbor seals that are a little easier to study. And then we apply that to killer whales. But we still have a lot to learn. And then vessels and sound. In addition to figuring out how vessels and sound affect the whales, we also are able to use some research tools to figure out if our regulations are effective. If keeping boats that 200-yard distance, is that reducing the sound level that's received by the whale? And how do we know what that sound level received by a whale is? We put an acoustic tag with suction cups onto the whale, and that's this picture of Jeff Hogan, whose mom is here with us tonight. He's putting a suction cup tag on the whale, and that's recording not just the sound that the whale hears, but how the whale is moving, how it's diving, how it's rolling, and how fast it's moving. So we'll be able to create sort of a 3D picture of how the whale responds to different situations with different sound levels and different boat activity.
How long? How long does it last? How long does it last?
Well, the goal is for it to stay on for like 6 hours.
Oh, that's long.
It's just, and then it pops off. Yep. Sometimes it stays on longer, and that's a long day on the water, following the whale with the tag. Sometimes it stays on less, so it's just if Jeff gets it on just right. So a lot of research going on, and we work with a lot of partners in that arena as well. A big component of our recovery program is what's going on right here tonight. It's raising awareness, it's getting people who are interested up to speed on what some of the issues are, what are some things that we can do to help protect habitat and restore Puget Sound for the whales. And we work with so many different partners on the outreach. The Whale Trail, who's been so kind to host tonight. We also work with the Seattle Aquarium and the Whale Museum. Killer Whale Tales, which is a classroom program. We work with the sighting networks, groups like Orca Network that are out there getting information from the public about when the whales are seen. Those sighting networks are also key, and the stranding network is key. Learning about why a whale might have died, and when we get a stranded whale, that's also part of our program. And it's also a powerful outreach tools. We learn about things like a gray whale with marine debris in its stomach. That's a good teaching story. It's not a great story, but it helps raise awareness about what we can do. I mentioned Soundwatch. That's that on the water. They're handing out materials. They're educating boaters about responsible viewing. We work with the Whale Watch Association. It's a good partnership. They know right up front what the rules are. We have a good interaction with them, and they're pretty good about following the rules. Some of the biggest problems are the recreational boaters that either don't know the rules or don't care. They just want to get close to the whales and maybe aren't as aware of or concerned about the impacts they might be having. And the whale watch industry, they do a lot of education with their naturalists on board. And then also just a whole host of other nonprofit groups. And this is really our opportunity to reach much bigger audiences than NOAA could on its own. So thanks for coming and being a part of killer whale recovery tonight. Yeah, give yourself a hand. So while that's one of the good stories, what I do is really challenging. And killer whales are in the press a lot. When we put out our recovery plan, one of the big news items was how much is this going to cost? And it is expensive. Restoring Puget Sound, recovering salmon, these are difficult tasks. Dealing with contaminants in our environment, very challenging. So how many people think we got $50 million to recover killer whales? No, we didn't. So that's again one of the reasons why our partnerships are so important, where we can leverage resources that different groups are able to pull together, and why supporters like Senator Cantwell has been really key in helping us get some of the research done and some of the recovery actions implemented. So lots of challenges out there, but
We should have gotten the 50 million.
well, it would be nice. Yes.
How much did you get?
We started getting about $1 million a year back in 2003, and that's gone down a little bit. So when we're in the we started with more of $1.5 million. Now we're down to sort of $1 million. About 3/4 or 2/3 goes to the science side, and we get the rest. And it's really not enough. So now it's 7 years after the listing, but a couple years ago we did a 5-year check-in. We did a 5-year review. And that was a chance for us to go back and look at all the actions that we had implemented. Where are we making progress? Identify some of the key actions that we haven't done yet that need some attention and perhaps some funding. We also go through our recovery criteria in our plan and say, are the whales growing as fast as we'd like them? And they have not met all of these recovery criteria. We have met a couple, just a couple. One of our recovery criteria is to have an oil spill response plan, and that we do have underway. So that's nice to be able to check that one off the list. But there are many more that we still need to make some progress on, and really make some progress in boosting the reproduction of the whales, making sure they have enough to eat and they're protected from threats. So our conclusion of that 5-year review was that we were going to keep the southern residents listed as endangered, but not everybody agrees that they should be. So just at the end of last year, we got a petition asking us to review the status of the whales, to look at some of those genetic things that we looked at and our distinct population segment determination, and rethink that. And so it's a process, again, one of those government processes where there's some new scientific information. So we're going to consider that. We're conducting an update to the status review. We're going to look at the new studies and see if that affects the decision that we made kind of back in 2004 and 2005 with the status review we did then and the listing. So, it's not everyone's in agreement on what the best course of action is for the whales. So I don't want to leave on that note, but I do want to let you know that we've got lots of information. This was really just kind of a quick overview, and I'm dying for you guys to ask me some questions, so I hope you've got some good ones. But we do have a website, and we've got lots of links to all of our partners. We've got descriptions of the recovery program, a lot more information and background on some of the things that I just touched on briefly tonight. And we also have an email list. If anyone's interested in getting updates from NOAA when we're putting out something there where there's a public comment period, or we found out about a stranded killer whale and that it was identified through genetics as a member of JPOD, things like that, we send out notices. And you can either go on our website and sign up, or you can just send an email to orca.plan@noaa.gov, and we can get you on that list. And with that, I hope you guys have some good questions, so thanks. Oh, all right, in the back.
What was the new science?
I can say. Oh, yeah, no, so the petitioners that asked us to take the whales off the list, there's some new scientific publications, one in particular that's specific to how much genetic mixing there might be between the different ecotypes of whales. How distinct, how separate are the southern residents? So just that new information coming to us kind of triggers this status review, and we'll look at that, and we'll look at the information that we had back in 2004, and we'll see if that affects the decisions that we made.
Mixing mean as like southern and northern, but not
No, like residents
with
and transients.
Oh, because I thought that was already decided, that they do not mix.
Well,
I know
yeah.
they make them mix in like SeaWorld when they force them to breed, but not.
So there's some uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty in this world, included with killer whale genetics. And some of our taxonomy, how we declare species and subspecies and things like that, are pretty slow. It takes a lot of data and a lot of scientific support to make those distinctions. So still some uncertainty in the world, and different researchers that don't always agree.
I was curious, is there specific groups that are behind the petition to delist, and why would they want a delisting?
Okay, so
You're being very diplomatic.
so the petitioners, it's the Pacific Legal Foundation, and they are petitioning on behalf of a couple of farms in California. So it's the connection is water rights in California and agriculture, and how that's impacted by endangered and listed salmon that are in those rivers, and how that's connected to the whales because the whales eat the salmon. So that's the connection. Those are the petitioners. How about in the back?
You said that in the sonar part, that like pile driving, noise making in the water, as long as you have a federal agency or someone who has to have a federal permit, et cetera, you have some leverage to make them, mitigate this. What if it's some corporatist out there that is just going to do this, and I'm going to make some money, I'm going to put this dock or wharf or restaurant out here, I'm going to pile drive that down there. What sort of leverage do you have with that type of endeavor?
They need a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers
Really?
to do that in water construction. So that's our link.
And the Army is cooperative with you?
Yes. Yeah, we work very closely with the Army Corps. They're one of our main Section 7 coordination points because they do so many in-water construction permits. Yeah.
Are they the shoreline people? They approve permits for shoreline areas?
Well, yeah, things like pile driving for a dock or placement of shoreline armoring, things like that. Any construction in the water.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You started doing a lot of research in 2003, and the protection happened in 2007. What effect did NOAA have on getting protection? Your research.
Well, I think...
Were you the stimulus, or?
Well, the stimulus came from the community after a population decline. Again, we got a petition, and this one was to list the southern resident killer whales. That was from the Center for Biological Diversity. And so, and a number of other groups signed on to that petition as well. So that was really the impetus. But I think a lot of the research that has been done on the genetics has been really interesting as far as the separations between residents and transients. A lot of the behavior research has been also interesting for us to look at as we're determining whether this small group of whales in the context of all the killer whales in every ocean worldwide, if they really are significant, how they use their habitat, how it's different from other whales. So really, all of the different research projects have contributed to that knowledge about what makes the southern residents unique and how southern residents are similar or different from other types of killer whales.
So what about the northern residents? I mean, it sounds to me like they are somewhat similar, but what's happened to them?
They're doing really well.
Are they?
Yes, they're a bigger population. They showed a similar decline in that late 90s period. But whereas the southern residents have sort of leveled off a little bit, the northern residents have just kept on climbing. They've got over 3% population growth.
Is that because of the Fraser River?
Well, they feed on a lot of the same fish. They use different parts of the habitat. The northern residents range further north. Their habitats are a little bit different.
Get more salmon.
Well, do the
Well,
southern residents come down here because we're urban and they're urban in the sense that they're family? And so subsequently they're getting a lot more contaminants?
They are getting more contaminants. They're more vessel traffic, and so they're subject to a little bit more of an urban environment for part of their year.
What I was going to say, you might want to mention, or the captures had more of an impact on the southern residents than the northern residents. So we might see generation gaps in these whales that the northern residents were also captured, but not to the same extent.
We went to a talk and heard someone from NOAA talk about what she had been doing with the removal of the Elba Dam.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things she said was that there seems to be a little controversy with the fisheries and the release of non-wild salmon. And of course, that's mostly Chinook, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, how is NOAA on all of that? The whales need more to eat.
It's
but
really challenging, that hatchery issue. Hatcheries, there are a number of different reasons we have hatcheries. Some make up for some of the hydropower system and the dam systems, how they've affected habitat and salmon. Some are more conservation oriented. And if I'm right, if I get this story right, one of the concerns is that there's some eagerness now that the Elwha Dam is down to kind of jumpstart that population again by doing a little bit more hatchery production rather than waiting for the natural production to take off. And so it is controversial. It's, there are some conservation benefits and there are some conservation risks for hatchery programs. A lot has to do with the genetics. So I don't, and there's usual and accustomed fishing for Indian tribes, and so they're definitely eager to be able to exercise their treaty rights and harvest those fish, as are commercial fishermen. So it's really a tough situation to find that balance. We're working on a lot of hatchery genetic management plans, and this is with the hatchery operators, with the scientists, to find that balance where we can bolster and support recovery of these salmon populations, and yet limit the, some of the impacts from genetic mixing, things like that.
How does the flame retardant contaminant get into the ecosystem, and why wasn't it under the consultation section 7 of the ESA?
That's a tricky question. So EPA has not always consulted with NOAA Fisheries and with the Fish and Wildlife Service when they are approving new chemicals. It sounds like a federal action, doesn't it?
No kidding.
Yeah. So there's actually been some lawsuits that have been brought against EPA for not going through a more thorough evaluation of impacts to endangered species from pesticides and things like flame retardants. So that's going on right now.
So how does it get into the ecosystem?
Oh, so the flame retardants are in all kinds of products. Your curtains, your couches, your rugs. A lot of it is driven by some fire suppression in California, and we have the same distributors for those types of items all along the West Coast. And when you're washing things and there's dust and disposing of things, the PBDEs get into the environment in that way. When you wash your flame retardant pajamas.
And there's no restrictions on any of that yet?
There are some, and they're phasing in over time. And PBDEs are similar to some of those other contaminants like PBDEs and DDT. They act in a similar way, and they break down in the environment in a way that those broken down components are more harmful. And so it's just taking a long time to make those links between those types of contaminants and the impacts, not just to wildlife, but to humans as well. And get some protection.
Predators at the end.
Yeah, we're Same follow-up?
Well,
Or
a
new
little bit different.
question?
I was interested in what the ratfish population is doing in Puget Sound. Seems to be exploding.
Ratfish.
It was been there. we just didn't
What's
know about it.
another name of the ratfish?
Rockfish?
No,
Ratfish, yeah.
Not a president.
I,
doing well.
I'll say
You- You've stumped the NOAA expert.
that's not my area of expertise. They're not listed under the endangered species list, so they don't land on my plate yet, so.
There's a lot of them.
Laura, do you know anything about ratfish?
There's always been a lot of them, is my understanding, we just didn't see them. We weren't
really?
pulling them up, but I have not heard personally, I honestly don't know.
I mean,
But
there
I
has
haven't
been
heard of any, like,
precedent.
I don't see any more, in 20 years of diving, I have not seen an explosion of population. They are deep water fish, and so the more deep water exploration we're able to do, the more of them we see. They do come up and congregate in the shallows for, I don't know, mating or something. They come up and down the slope, and sometimes you'll go places and you'll see like hundreds of them. You're like, oh my God, there's so many redfish, and then you'll see none for like months at a time. And so they all have everything as a cycle. We're in spring now. There's lots of things with eggs out there in the water currently, and cabezon and lingcod hatching and stuff like that, and rockfish obviously. So.
Sort of a two-part question. Is that pretty right saying that there's about 90 population for JK&L?
Yeah, I think it's 84 right now.
And
Give or take.
yet, then you say that there's a 3% population growth, so that my math says that they have like 3 offspring a year, give or take.
Oh, for the southern residents?
Yeah.
Oh, I was talking about the northern residents, are actually, I think they're even above 3.
So less, so that maybe only 2 per year then? In the,
We have been holding steady, so when we have a new calf that survives, we're also losing.
so you may be losing more. Oh, I see. The growth is up, but you're losing more adults as opposed to newborns.
Well, for southern residents, the growth has been about steady for the last couple of years, and yeah, we're losing that battle. It's not going the right direction. For northern residents, they have more calves. They have them more frequently. The moms seem to have calves every 4 years in the northern residents, and it's more like every 5 years or so in the southern residents. So there's some differences in that population growth, and certainly there's the number of reproductive females is much greater in the northern residents. Yeah, that's what we're going to see.
So you mentioned that the families stay together, but do the adult males eventually move on, or do they breed within an individual family or within the JKL? Do they mix within those 3?
So they'll stay with their moms, but they do breed outside of their pod and outside their matriline, but not always. Probably one of the results of the captures that focused on some males is that we had a gap for a number of years when there just were not very many reproductive age males. And we actually did see some interbreeding within J-pod. J1, also known as Ruffles, who's no longer with us, but he was a father of many calves that we were able to identify, including J-pod calves. Not in his immediate matriline and family, but still related. So that's a concern for us for inbreeding and population depression. So we think that they should be breeding outside their pods,
But they couldn't.
but they probably just didn't have enough opportunities. And we think, and in some of the studies in the northern residents, one of the theories, they've seen more, breeding, there are more pods, more breeding outside the pod, and one of the theories is that the dialects that they use, and they know each other. They know who their family members, who their close families are, and who their more distant families are. So that might be a mechanism that helps them not inbreed too much.
So roughly, can you say how long the status review will take for the delisting? I mean, is it like a few months, a year?
So we have a year from when we received the petition, which was in August. So we have till August of 2013. And we're in the process. We'll see if we can get that moving. We might not need to take all of the time that we have, but.
Did you like a hearing or just review what they've submitted? Or?
We didn't have any hearings. We did have a public comment period where we solicited, scientific information to help inform the status review. We got a lot of public feedback and input and comments, not necessarily scientific related, but very supportive of keeping the killer whales on the endangered species list.
You think he'll win?
I can't prejudge the outcome of our status review. I'll say that we acknowledge some of the uncertainties in the genetic data at the time we made our DPS determination in 2004. So the fact that there still remain uncertainties is not surprising. And yeah, we'll consider the new information and go from there.
You made a couple references to the captures, could you explain that?
So 60s, 70s, and this is before my time, I know this from history. There were captures here in Puget Sound for public display industry. Yeah, so
1965 to 1976. First whale was captured in 1965 up in BC, Namu, BC, and towed to the end of Pier 55 and held there. And the guy who captured the whale, then some of you long-timers know it better than the story better than I do.
Mostly males.
But learned
Mostly
that
males.
the orcas weren't sharks, that they were gentle and curious, and that was the birth of orcas being taken and put on display in aquariums.
And they were all called Namu.
Yeah.
Well, Shamu, Namu, right. And the sad part is they keep the whales named the same thing because they die so soon. They captured 63 whales altogether removed from the southern and northern resident population. Most of them died within a few years.
3 years, I think?
And some of them died during the capture operations.
Right. And there's of those 63, there's 2 that are still alive. One is Corky at SeaWorld San Diego, she's a northern resident, and Lolita at the Miami Seaquarium, who's a southern resident. So, but again, it was Washington State actually had to sue. Now, Lynn wasn't there then, but they had
That's part of the history.
They had to sue NOAA Fisheries to stop the permits, to stop permitting the captures. They believed there were many more killer whales than there were. They thought there were thousands of whales because that was before anyone knew how to do the photo ID studies. It said, when you see a whale in Seattle in the morning and Rib in the afternoon and San Juan Island the next day, that's not 3 groups of whales. That's one group of whales who travel 70 to 100 miles in a day. So the permits were based on population estimates that were wildly off. That's what gave birth to the photo ID studies that are ongoing today.
So another anniversary is the Marine Mammal Protection Act. That 40-year anniversary was last year. And that, there haven't been any live capture permits issued.
1983, there was one for Alaska, the coast of Alaska. That's when I became interested in killer whales, was in stopping that capture that the governor of Alaska stopped. That was the last permit. It's still not illegal. There's a moratorium on it. It's very unlikely for it to happen. And it does happen around the world. There are still whales captured in Taiji, Japan in the 1990s. So and in Russia, not that long ago.
For entertainment?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so.
Lynn, what would you do if there was an oil spill? I mean, how would you stop these whales from migrating into an oil spill?
So there have been a couple unique situations that we've learned from. Exxon Valdez, there were killer whales, and they tried some different methods there. We've had killer whales trapped in Barnes Lake in Alaska. We've had killer whales in Dyes Inlet that transients. And so a number of things have been tried. And one of the things that seems to be effective in moving the whales and kind of annoying them is to bang on pipes. And these pipes, oikami pipes, they're used in dry fisheries for marine mammals in Japan. That's their origin. And sort of lining up a few boats with these banging pipes that make a sound that seems to annoy the whales, but isn't at a level that could injure their hearing or anything like that. Just sort of try to encourage them to go in the right direction. So that's one tool. And then there are a number of other things. Helicopters, they seem to be affected when the helicopter is hovering low and making that splash on the surface. There are some boat activities that people have tried. And one of the other things is that we might need to try a few different things. Seal bombs were used in some of the live captures for the aquaria industry. It's just a loud boom. We use it for sea lion deterrence. That was another method. So we have sort of a whole laundry list, and we've identified how to do it safely for humans and for the whales, and what the different risks of the different methods are, and what we think the likelihood of effectiveness might be. So we've kind of got a whole suite of options and a few different things that we can try. And these whales are smart, so we might need a couple of different things to keep.
Just to keep it from happening,
Yep.
no. Prevention is absolutely.
They don't seem to avoid the oil on their own. They'll swim through it. It can affect their mucous membranes, their eyes, their blowholes. They can ingest it. Really, really damaging. So another piece of our data gap is that we don't really have a good sense of sort of what the chronic exposure to petroleum and PAHs might be for these whales, and what their exposure during a big oil spill might be. So that's another thing we're working on.
Okay, last one, I think.
Oh, we got two more.
All right.
Oh, maybe three more. You go first.
Some of the pictures you showed, there were boats, particularly kayaks, that looked way closer than 200 yards. So just as a recreational boater, like, how does that work? So especially if you're in a kayak, you can't necessarily get out of the way if the whale decides to come closer.
There's actually a education program specific for kayakers that gives some great instruction about how to adhere to the guidelines, when it's best to sort of raft up, where to stay on what side of the whales, whether it's inshore or offshore. These whales can swim faster than you can probably kayak, but there are definitely things that you can do to keep out of the path of the whales when you know they're coming toward you, or to just raft up with your group and let the whales pass by. So definitely some special tricks for the kayak community. And the Whale Museum has a program called KELP, and I can't remember what it stands for. I might have a brochure with me, but it's really geared toward that specific boater group and some of the tricks for paddlers. But it's definitely a challenge. So we had two more over here.
I was just wondering what the current what's going on currently. You mentioned sonar issues, what out of Bangor, I guess is where they're generally from. What's kind of going on right now with that?
Let's see. So what's going on out here? The Navy has a 5-year permit for a limited amount of sonar exercises off the coast in their operating area. They have mitigation measures in place for monitoring and shutdown and listening for different marine mammals. And so those permits are issued out of our headquarters office. It's called an incidental harassment permit, and they have to report on an annual basis. So that's going on currently, but the Navy's already looking ahead, because that's only good for 5 years. And they've already started a scoping process for an environmental impact statement for that next 5 years. And that next look that they're doing includes not just the activities off the coast, but also some additional things in inland waters at Bangor and projects like that. So they actually have really good information on their webpage. The Navy Northwest Environmental Program, and there's opportunities for public input into that environmental impact statement process. So it's hard. I try and keep track and tabs, especially since there's a lot going on here in the Northwest. Not as much as that's going on in other regions, but these Navy sonar issues are very high level, and most of it's handled out of our headquarters office. So trying to keep tabs on what DC is doing can be a challenge sometimes, but I try. All right, and last one, Laura.
So, this is going to be kind of maybe an odd question. On the internet, there's kind of one of those stories that goes around that the happiest day in the whale's lives, like in the past 100 years, was 3 days after 9/11, because they shut down all the shipping for home port security, and it made it quiet. Is there truth to that story? No,
I would imagine the skies and
the skies
were quiet.
Everything was quiet, and
oceans were quieter.
Yeah, and they say the whales didn't have as much stress hormones in their poop or something. But you know how the internet is. There's a lot of fictitious stories out there that make us all believe that we need to.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any whale happiness metric, but
It's related to Chinook.
but that's an interesting thing to think about of where the whales. It's very interesting that the whales spend so much time in Puget Sound, which is such a busy place with oil tanker traffic,
which may increase,
which could increase with coal terminals and liquefied natural gas. terminals, things like that.
Exporting all that.
So one of the things that we're trying to get more information on is exactly what types of sound affect the whales in which way. So those big tankers, a lot of that sound is very low frequency. Killer whales are sort of mid-frequency specialists, and they communicate and echolocate at much higher hertz. Yeah, the frequency, the pitch of the sound. So while for those big ships, a lot of the energy is really in this low frequency bands that are probably a bigger impact on large whales that are more of a low frequency communicator, blue whales that are communicating over long distances. So yeah, ocean noise is really a hot topic with marine mammals. Everything from sonar that might be causing strandings and changes in dive patterns to whales that might be shifting their migration patterns around drilling platforms and things like that. Also some ship quieting research that's going on that the Navy's the lead for. So a lot of, it's kind of a worldwide issue and concern.
Well, we
and
should
a lot of
already
people
have
look
that
at it.
technology.
Well, but then there's some thoughts that right whales that just might not respond to the sound as much, or that the sound might be a key that helps them avoid getting hit by a ship, that the ship quieting might be worse. So lots to learn about ocean noise and marine mammals.
I know, because as divers, we hear it.
Oh, yeah.
And the pile driving and the ships and the big ships, when they're coming in and out of the straits, you hear it in your chest. I mean, like, if they're close, you feel like you're getting your heart jump started. And it just can't be good to live in. We're only in it for half an hour at a time. If there's pile driving going on close by, sometimes you just don't even want to dive there.
Mm-hmm. And that one of the mitigation measures that we have in place is monitoring in the zone that we think is loud enough to affect the behavior of the whales, and then particularly where it's loud enough that it could injure their hearing, and having shutdown procedures where they'll stop. They watch for marine mammals while the pile driving is going on, and then they'll shut down so that they don't expose them to those levels of sound. So.
Lynn, thank you
All right.
very, very much.